We're doing a series called Heaven Here and Now, and I'm really excited for this series that we're doing. I hope you guys are enjoying it, and I'm excited to share with you again this Sunday. I gotta admit, though, I'm a bit nervous. I don't get to preach in front of my mom or anyone in my family that much, and my mom's one of the few people that can tell me off. And my mom can do it in the most, I'm sure we all got moms in the room. You know when your mom uses your full name? Right? I don't know what it does, but it takes you back to being a little baby, right? No matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 5, 10, 33, 72. I think when you hear your mom use your full name, you're just deer in headlights. It's like everything stripped back. And I guess I've been thinking about that, and I reckon one reason I feel that way when my mom says my full name is I feel like I'm fully exposed. Have you ever had a moment where you feel like you're fully exposed? There's no more walls that you can put up. People are seeing everything. People are seeing your worst character flaws, the biggest mistakes, all that. You're fully exposed. You can't do anything to hide it. I think that's what happens when, at least for me, my mom says my full name, but I think there's other things that can have this feeling for us where we feel like we're fully exposed. And I'm sure if we've had these moments, you don't have to put your hand up because I'm not going to do that, but I know I have, and I know when I have these moments, I just want to disappear. Like, just disappear, melt away. And it's a hard feeling when we get in these places, when we feel like we're fully exposed. Today, I want to share a story that I think can help us in these moments. And this story comes from Luke chapter 23, verse 35 to 43. And I have to segue. This was not my planned message. I wrote out my sermon, prayed for my messages beforehand, worked on my sermon all week, laying in bed, and I thought, Wednesday night, I'm just going to check with God, make sure I'm all good. And I was like, God, is this what you want me to share? And then he was a pain. And he told me no, and I'm like, shouldn't have asked you, but too late then because I did. So I had to change it. But I really feel like God has something that he wants to share. So I went with that. So I've changed the direction, and this verse, I think, just really shows me something that can help us when we're in these moments where we're fully exposed. And this story is interesting because I'm sure if you read the Gospels, I remember someone told me when I was first a Christian, just read the Gospels. It's the story of Jesus. But then the Gospels change some of the stories. Like, have you ever noticed that? Like, some of the details are different. And you're like, wait, what a second? What? Didn't the ladies find them first? No, what's going on now? What is this? Like, what? I'm so confused, and you get confused sometimes. But I look at it now, and I just look at it as these gospel writers each had their own point of view. And I'm sure if we all wrote a story about our day and we all did the same stuff, it's going to be different, right? Because different things are going to stick out to us because we're all different. So that's what I think so interesting about the Gospels. And I love this account of the Gospel because it's the only one that has this event. And I think there's something powerful in it. So I want to look at this story with you guys that's found in Luke chapter 23. So if you want, you can open up your Bibles. If you brought them with you, if you got a Bible on your phone app, you can bring that up. I got the words that are going to come up, and I'm reading from the NRSV version. So I'm sure it's going to sound different than yours, but that's all right. All Bible versions kind of change a little bit. But this is what we read. And the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, he saved others. Let him save himself. If he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, this is the king of the Jews. Now, before I go any further, if you haven't realized, this is at Jesus' crucifixion. So at this point in time, Jesus has been nailed to a cross. with the aim of the cross being to suffocate you. You want to breathe? All right, you got to push down on the nails that are going through the bones in your legs or through the nails that are going through your wrist. Jesus has also been whipped. He's also had 2 court appearances which weren't that great. One that ended in all of his people, all his elders stripping him and punching him and spitting on him. And you're nailed to the cross, and it doesn't stop. He's still having this go on around him. These people mocking him. Let's keep reading. One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation?" Before I go any further, I think it's interesting, because this is a fully exposed moment, if you ask me. For everyone involved. I think it is for Jesus, his whole ministry, everything he's done. Even the physical, his body beaten. He's bleeding, he's bloody, and he's hanging on a cross, dying. I think it's the same for these criminals as well. They're fully exposed for everyone to see. Let's keep reading. And the second criminal goes on, "And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom." He replied, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Wow. I love that story. I think it gives me chills just reading it, especially if you set up the scene a little bit with everything that's already been happening. And I want to point out a couple of things that just really stand out to me. The first is these criminals didn't even get their names mentioned. Not once do we know their names. I think that's interesting. And this fully exposed moment, they're not even worthy of having their names mentioned. You know, some accounts will just say rebels or criminals, but you don't have a name, like Bob the criminal, Billy the thief. Like, you would think you would mention a name, but there's not even a name mentioned. The second thing that stands out to me is they felt deserving of the punishment. Because we don't know what crime they did. We can speculate on all these things. We can speculate with, maybe some hints that we get given in the text, but we don't know for sure what crime they committed. But whatever crime they committed, these 2 blokes felt that it was right to hang them on the cross. The most gruesome way to die. Now, I've seen kids get in trouble. Do you see many kids agreeing with the consequence of what they've been in trouble for? We don't see that often, do we? It's a rare thing, but here you have it. And I think both of them felt this way. The reason I say both is I know only one criminal says something, but it sounds like the criminal who was, giving Jesus a little nudge, save us if you're the Son of God thing. I feel like if he didn't feel he was deserving, he would have spoke up. But he doesn't say anything. He doesn't go to his mate, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, Bob. I don't deserve this. I only killed 3 people, I was just thinking of beheading." We don't hear any of that. They both felt deserving of the punishment. And the punishment is the most gruesome way to die, the most painful way to die. If you don't believe, do some research on it. Because we like to think it's the pain or it's the blood loss, but really it's suffocation. Eventually they get too tired. and it's too hard to hold your body up. And I can't imagine that. I can't imagine criminals saying that they're deserving of that punishment. That stands out to me. The last thing that stands out to me is no one was there for them. We don't read of anyone being there in support of these criminals. We don't read of anyone being there helping them out. I mean, I have to ask myself, where's their mom? Because I know I can do anything and my mom would support me. I know that because she hates me doing the MMA fighting that I used to do. But I still remember my first fight. Who was there in the front row? My mom. And man, when she screamed at me to start fighting back, like, that energized me like something else. But in this moment, there's no one there. No one, not even their moms. They're fully exposed and pretty much deemed worthless. Don't get their names mentioned. Deserving to die on a cross. No one's there to see them. I think these are important things to notice. Because in this moment where one of the criminals is turning his focus towards Jesus, what does Jesus do? And Jesus sees him. And that's because grace fills the gaps. The grace that we find in Christ fills the gaps of our imperfections. Fills the gaps of our shortcomings, of our biggest character flaws, of our biggest mistakes. Because that's what Jesus does in this moment. He just sees them. It says, tonight you'll be with me in paradise. Or today, I can't remember. It's one of the two. But like, think about that. Did the criminal say, I'm sorry for what I did? Nope. Did the criminal say, I'm a bad person, please forgive me? No. He simply looked at Jesus, said, you don't deserve to be here. When you get into your kingdom, can you just remember me? He felt worthless. He felt like he didn't deserve anything. He just wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be more than just the two criminals who were crucified with Jesus. He just wanted to be remembered. And what does Jesus do? He goes above and beyond that. He sees them, and his grace fills the gaps of this criminal's imperfection. And I think we can experience heaven here and now when we realize in our heads and hearts that grace fills the gaps because it is who God is. Now I say heads and hearts because I think this is something we struggle with to know in both places. It's something that we probably all as Christians, if we say that we're Jesus followers, we would know in here, right? But it's a lot harder to know in our hearts. It's a lot harder to know when we're fully exposed. It's a lot harder to know when we make a mistake. It's a lot harder to know when poop hits the fan. But I think these are the moments we have to know it in our heart. We have to know it. That grace fills the gaps because it's who God is. It's not about us. It's not about what little Matt can do. It's about who God is. And I believe as Jesus followers, once we realize this in our head and our hearts and we really take it on board, it inspires us to see others with the same lens and allows grace to fill the gaps. because we never know anyone else's story. I mean, if anyone could have responded to the criminal and been like, yo, you've done some shady stuff. You need to say sorry for that first. I mean, it'd have to be Jesus, right? But what does Jesus, God in flesh, do in that moment? It just says, tonight you'll be with me in paradise. Because grace fills the gaps. And when we know this in our head and heart, we'll see others like this. Because I think in churches, we need to realize that no one's too far from the gifts of heaven. Because I think sometimes we can be a bit judgy. And I'm sure we've all met judgy Christians. I'm sure we've all been judgy Christians. I know I have been. But I think if I sit with God in stories like this, and I realize that God's grace fills the gaps of my imperfections, and I really understand that with my head and heart, it's going to inspire me to see others the same way. It's going to inspire me to drop that judgment. And what I think is really interesting is the book of Revelations, I think, even makes this clear. Because towards the end of Revelations, in Revelations chapter 22, verses 1 to 2, we read something interesting. At the end of this apocalyptic book. So if you ever read the book of Revelations, which, have fun. It's got some great imagery. It's very confusing. You'll probably find 100 theologians with different ideas on how to interpret it, and all will make good sense. But towards the end of this book, we read something interesting that I just want to read with you, that I think really, at least for me, hammers the point home. And this is towards the end of Revelation when the new city's been established. We read this. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. That's at the end. We read about all these calamities, all this stuff, all this big war. And then at the end, it still says, you still see this heart of God to bring healing to the nations, to bring healing to people who want to come in. What does that show us? I think for me, it shows me that God has this amazing grace that fills the gaps. And please don't quote me on any end times thing. I got no idea on Revelations. I'm just going to be honest. I got all my speculations, but I really have no idea. And I'm just going to be along for the ride and enjoy it. But I find it so interesting that we find this text that seems to just be hammering at the point of a God who's full of grace. So I want you today to do something with me. I want us to remember that God sees us with grace that fills the gaps, which inspires us to do the same. But this is something we got to know in our head and in our hearts. And I don't know what everyone's going through. And I'm not going to sit up here and ever act like I do. But I know one thing, no matter what anyone's going through, no matter how far you think you've messed up, no matter how much poops hit the fan, as I like to say, which I'm sure my mom's going to ask me why I said that earlier, but I'll tell her at least I didn't say the other word, which she'll tell me good job about maybe. I'm hoping that saves me. But no matter how far you've been, no matter what's going on, God has this grace that fills the gaps. Because I know for me, I wouldn't be able to do my job without that grace. Because I can't get up here and ever act like there's times that I don't feel like a fraud. I can't act like I don't get up here and there's times that I just literally want to cry. Last thing I do is want to get up and talk to people about God. But I know every time those moments come, God's with me and he gives me this grace that fills the gaps. And I know he can do the same for you. And I know when we realize that, we get to have heaven here and now. So I'm just going to close in prayer, and then our worship team is going to come back up. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you that you love us so much, that you have this grace that can fill the gaps. When we feel like we're mistakes or frauds or there's so much going on in our world and we just don't know what to do, I thank you that you're there, that you just wrap us up, that you embrace us like Jesus did to the criminal on the cross next to him. I pray that you'll help us know that in our head. Bring scriptures and stories to our minds to help remind us of that. I pray that you'll remind us of that in our hearts. Whatever we need to have happen to remind us of that in our hearts, not just in our heads, I pray that you make that happen. I pray that if we came to you and experienced some warmth or some amazing event, that you would rebirth that event. You would reignite that flame in us. Help us to know this in our head and heart so we can look out to your world and see the world as you do. And instead of judging, just have grace that fills the gaps. In your amazing name, amen.